Hi there, Kane from Black Scorpion here to give you a little rundown of Tombstone. We're here in Black Scorpion's top secret testing facility to show you some of the basics mechanics for the game. We're not going to do massive detail, just a few little bits so you can get an idea of how the game runs. Before we get into that though, we'd like to say a massive thank you to everyone that's backed the Kickstarter so far. We've had a massive response, much more than we could have predicted, so thank you very much for that. What I would ask is if you're already a backer or interested in the game, please share it on social media, spread the word around. The more people that hear about it, the better. So, without further ado, let's get into it and see what the game looks like.
So I'll start off by talking just a few of the basics. So the way Tombstone works is a bit different than some of the games you might have played before, because the game doesn't have strict player turns. Instead it uses an action point system. One player rolls a dice, and this is the action total both players will use. How and when you use your action points forms a large part of the strategy behind the game. Here's where we record our action points, and as we go through the game those action point totals will reduce. Here's our dice roll, and we've got 5 action points, so I'm going to mark that now on the action point marker. Now, another mechanic in the game is active and inactive. So at any one time, one gang or posse will be active, the other will be inactive. The active gang have a decision to make. Do they want to move, or do they want to shoot? And you only do one of those things at a time. So if you decide you're going to move, you would use all of your action points to move. So you could move 5 models. If you decide to shoot, you would use all your action points for shooting. So you would shoot with 5 models. Now there's an important point to note here that movement doesn't end your turn, for a better way of putting it, but shooting does. So at the end of movement, you are still the active gang, so you could decide to do something else. However, at the end of shooting, then you become inactive, so you're basically handing over to your opponent. So deciding when to move and when to shoot is also part of the tactics. So as an example here, if I declare a movement action and I've got 5 action points, I can move 5 models round the board. I would then move my AP counter down by 1, getting me to 4. I could then declare a movement or shooting phase, but in this scenario, let's say I declare a shooting phase. I would then shoot 4 times, or I could shoot with 4 models, and put a little note here, whereas that each model can only carry out one thing per set, so you couldn't use all of your 4 action points on one model. Once I've carried out those 4 shots, I would then move my AP marker down by 1, and my gang would become inactive, meaning my opposition are now active. Let's talk through stats then. Again, slightly different to some of the things you might have seen in the past, where a stat line is represented by numbers. In Tombstone we use dice. We range from a D4 up to a D20, and obviously depending on the abilities and strengths of your character, you'll roll higher dice. Here's what it looks like. This is a lawman gang, so you've got a sheriff, deputies, lawman and town's watch. As you can see, the starting levels range from a D8 down to a D4, but as you go through a campaign you can your character can get better, which means they can get higher dice rolls, improve their stats. When you're playing the game you can get bonus dice, i.e. rolling 2 or 3 dice and picking the best, or you could get bonus levels, so you could go up a dice or down a dice depending what's happened, and we'll see some of that in a second in the gameplay. Different weapons also have different stats, so more powerful weapons will roll higher dice for their damage, and you can also fire aim shots or shoot from the hip, and there are modifiers for both. Tactical use of your action points is the key to win the game. So deciding when to shoot, when to move, and how to use your points up is basically how you're going to win the game. For instance, would you decide to empty your 6-shooter and then you've got to spend time reloading it, or do you decide to take one carefully aimed shot in the hopes that's definitely going to hit and not leaving yourself vulnerable afterwards to carry out lots of reloads? So that's some of the basics now, and let's move on.
Okay, welcome back. So, as you can see, I've got Gemma here who's going to give me a hand to go through the game. We've got a 2 foot by 2 foot table, but you could use 3 foot, 4 foot, whatever size you want. So, let's get on and see how the game goes.
So what we've got here then for our first little playthrough is just 2 models per side. I'm playing with an lawman posse, and Gemma's playing with an outlaw posse. She's using the female gang here, which, while they're not a faction in themselves, they can be used added into any faction you like. So here's our AP marker, and we're just going to use 2 AP to start off with, just to get a very basic kind of movement and shooting, and then we'll move on to bigger gangs with more AP. Now, movement in the game is 5 inches for non-mounted models, and there are separate rules for mounted models, which is 2.5 centimeters for those of you who don't use imperial measurements. So first thing I'm going to do is declare movement. So I'm going to move my 2 models into cover. Now, cover's obviously quite important in the game, and we'll talk about in a second what cover can do for you if you're being shot at. I've carried out that movement phase, so I'll now move my AP marker down to 1. I'm now declare a shooting phase, and I'm going to fire this guy here over at her. It's 7 inches, which is normal range. Now, there are special rules for point blank range and also for long range, which give you different modifiers to your dice. We're not going to cover that in this video. It's one of the rules kind of further on. Now, as we talked about earlier, the abilities of a character are represented by different dice. What we're rolling here is accuracy. So my lawman has an accuracy of D8. I'm rolling against Gemma's reaction, which is a D6. So we'll both roll a dice and we'll see what the scores come out at. I roll my D8 and I've rolled a 1. Gemma rolls hers, she's rolled a 3. If we have a look at the hit chart, you can see that there's my accuracy of 1, Gemma's reaction of 3, and that's a miss. Moving on then, because I've completed a shooting action, it's now Gemma's turn, so she becomes the active gang. She's finished her movement phase, so she moves her AP counter down by 1. She's now declare a shooting phase, and she's going to shoot back. Again, we look at our stat line. You can see her accuracy is a D6, and my reaction is a D6. However, cover gives you a bonus level. So, whereas normally I'd roll a D6 for this, I get to roll a D8. So I've got more chance of, or they've got less chance of hitting me. I've got more chance of dodging out of the way. Let's see how the dice come out. Gemma's rolled a 3, and despite having a D8, I've rolled a 1. Really not my day. So that's hit, so you can see here. So now we're going to have a look at what damage is done. So damage is done on the weapon. So a 6 shooter has a damage of a D6, and it's rolling against my constitution, which is a D6. So it's a D6 each. Gemma's rolled a 5, and I've rolled a 2, which is really not good. So we now look at the damage chart. On the damage chart, there's Gemma's 5, there's my 2, which means it's caused an injury. I'll then place an injured marker on my character, and injury means that you're on -1 level for the rest of the game. And if you were to take 2 injuries, that will put you out of the game. So that's just a couple of the basics there, and how we move and shoot. Let's move on to having a bigger gang, so we can see how it works with more models on the table. So now we've got 2 larger posses, 5 versus 5. Let's bring up our action point markers, and we're going to use 4 action points each. I'm going to start as the active gang, Gemma is the inactive gang, and as the active gang I'm declare a movement phase. I have 4 action points, meaning I can move 4 models. So I move these 4 models into cover so that I have the bonus dice level if they were to be shot at. I move my action point marker down by 1, so I'm now at 3. And I'm going to declare a shooting phase, bearing in mind that once I finish this shooting phase, the active gang is going to switch over. Here's the hit chart for reference. So my first shot here, I'm shooting with my accuracy of a D8 versus Gemma's reaction of a D6 because she's not in cover. A 3 versus 3 is a hit, so I now need to have a look at the damage. 6 shooter does d6 of damage. She's got constitution of d6. A 2 versus a 4 has done no damage, no effect. Let's look at my second shot then. Again, she's not in cover. I rolled a 1, so unless she rolls 1, which she hasn't, so that's missed. My final shot is up here. I notice I'm shooting through cover, so she'll still class as being in cover. So while I get a d8, she gets a d8 as well, but she's got really unlucky this time. And you notice on the right hand side, I've got accuracy of 7. Her reaction was a 1, which means I've done an injury straight away. So I've bypassed the need to roll on the damage chart. She places an injured marker next to her model, and that model now is going to be -1 level. I move my action points down by 1. So the active gang switches over. Gemma's gang is now active, and she has 4 action points. She starts with a movement phase. So she's going to move 4 models into cover here. And that's the last one there. The problem obviously Gemma had there, and as I had, is that with only 4 action points I can only move 4 models. Gemma moves her action point marker down by 1 to 3. She now has 3 action points, so she can carry out 3 things. She could, if she wanted to, carry out a movement phase at this point with the 1 character she has left, and there are special actions she could carry out in either movement or a shooting phase. So she might, for instance, if she'd done a lot of shooting already, want to move 1 character and perhaps do a couple of reloads, but we'll talk about that in a minute. For this moment she's going to carry out a shooting phase. Here's her first shot, and there's a hit chart again for reference. It's a d6 versus a d8 because I'm in cover. I've rolled a 3, meaning she's hit. So let's have a look at the damage. d6, which is a 6 shooter, versus my constitution of d6. 5 versus a 1, that's an injury. So I place an injured marker next to my model. Now for Gemma's second shot. She's rolling a d6, I'm in cover, so I've got d8. And I've rolled higher, meaning she's missed. Her last shot here, I'm out of cover, so it's a d6 versus a d6, because I don't get that bonus level. And luck would have it, she's missed. We move the AP marker down by 1. And as Gemma has carried out a shooting phase, the active and inactive gangs switch over again. So I'm now active. I have 2 choices. I could either carry out a movement or a shooting phase. I'm going to go for a bit more shooting. Here's my first shot. I'm rolling a d8. She's in cover, so it's a d8, and I've missed with that shot. Second shot, d8 again. Now, here's where it gets a little bit more complicated. She's -1 level because she's injured, so she would be down to a d4. But because she's in cover, she'll go back up 1, meaning it's a d6. That hasn't helped her though. I've rolled an 8 versus a 2, which means I've caused an injury straight away. Because of that injury, that model is taken out. Praise the sun. That's 1 model down. She'll then lay her model down, and then that marker will go next to it. I finish my shooting phase. I move my AP marker down by 1, and the active and inactive gang switches over again. We're now over to Gemma. She declares a movement phase and decides to get 2 of her models into cover. And of course, moving closer to the enemy can put them into a point blank range, which does give you bonuses. She moves her AP marker down by 1 and decides she's going to have 1 final shot. She's picking on my already injured model. She's rolling a d6, and again I've got the same situation as she had before, so I'm -1 level for being injured, but +1 level for being in cover, meaning I'm just at a d6. 5 versus 4 is a hit, so let's have a look at the damage. It's a d6, but I'm -1 level, so I'm now rolling a d4. 4 versus 1, meaning she's caused another injury, and that model is now taken out. and again I would lay my model down and put a taken out marker next to them, and they'll play no further part in the game. Gemma's now out of active action points, and the active and inactive gang switch over. I have one action point left, and I'm going to carry out a movement phase so I can get my last model into cover and get some protection. So that's it for a basic run through of the rules. There are a lot more rules to that, obviously. What we've had there is just basically a shootout in the street. If you're playing the game properly, you would potentially be further away, but also the main thing, you'd have an objective, something you're fighting over, something perhaps you're trying to steal, or a person maybe you're trying to steal. So your movement and shooting would be much more dependent on what you're trying to achieve for your objective. There are 8 encounters in the game, or 8 that we've pre-written for you, but of course you can create as many as you like. There are different types of weapons. So far we've just used 6 shooters, but as you can see there are lots of different types. Now you notice on the chart there you've got a damage roll of d6, but you also got ROF, which is rate of fire. So rate of fire is something that comes in when we're talking about special rules, and one of those is hip fire. As you can see, the character illustration there is firing from the hip. Now your rate of fire comes in when you're hip shooting. It means you can fire more shots, but you're going to have minuses, whether it be dice level, etc., for your shooting, which can affect how accurate you are. So you get more shots off, but they're less accurate. The other issue then you have is that you're going to have to reload your weapon afterwards, and that takes up an action. So if you half empty your pistol, you're then going to have to spend some time reloading it. So this is a thing where you're going to have to balance how many shots you take versus reloading. And those are what we refer to as special actions. Special actions can be taken instead of moving or shooting at any time. So spreading out your action points, deciding what to do with them, is obviously how the tactics of the game work. So that's a talk through the basics of the actual game in progress. Let's have a look at how the campaign works. So lastly, we're going to talk through a little bit of the campaign. So campaign really is the core of Tombstone. As you go through campaign, you can earn experience points, which you can use to improve your stats or potentially gain new skills. As you can see on the left, there's different ways for you to gain experience points, and on the right, there's not all the skills, but there's some of the skills that you can gain. Some of these skills are faction specific, so you can only gain if you're a certain faction. You can earn money from games. Certainly if you're doing a bank raid, you can earn some money. You can use that to recruit new members, or if you want to spend it on, say, a horse for your leader maybe, or you might want to save up and buy a mini Gatling gun if you can find one, or maybe you just fancy having a bit of Fowler whiskey. Now, post-game, as you saw earlier, one of my models was taken out, as was Gemma's. Now, you'd roll after the game and you can have serious injuries potentially that could reduce the dice you roll, your levels. Could potentially be killed if you're unlucky, or even get captured by the opposition gang. Now, Tombstone can be a simple, just a game you play a couple hours, just a standalone game. But where the really kind of the meat of the game is playing multiple games as part of a campaign that can last weeks, months, as long as you want it to, really. And as with any game, really, it's limited by your imagination. We've given you some starter encounters, but of course feel free to write your own. If you can think of it in an Old West setting, then there's a very good chance you can do it in Tombstone.
So that's a basic run through the game. We've talked through some of the basics. We've just used a few models working up to a smaller gang. We've talked a bit about the campaign and a few of the different special rules that apply. There is a lot more to the game, obviously, but we're not going to go into too much detail here. Big thank you to Gemma for joining us and helping us out. Really appreciate it. Again, a big thank you to you guys out there for backing us on Kickstarter. We really appreciate it. Look forward to more updates from us soon, where we'll be explaining some more details about the rules. Thanks so much, and thanks for watching.